Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, it is a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. And on today's show, we need to dive back into the Tennessee Titans 2022 regular season schedule. What are the Titans' must-win games on the slate next year? What are the X factor games that will decide the difference between the Titans hitting their ceiling or hitting their floor? And what are the games that I'm just flat out most excited to watch next season? We're diving back into the Titans schedule on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Titans fans, it is a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. And as I said in the intro, we're going to dive back into the Titans 2022 schedule. We had the recap episode on Friday. We had to recap minicamp on Monday, but we need to dive back in and sink our teeth back into this Titans schedule release. We're going to talk about the must-win games on the schedule to kick off today's show. Before we get into that, I got to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. If this is your first ever listen to the Locked On Titans podcast, make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you do stream. I am going to be putting out daily, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content, not only during the season, but all year round. That's on all platforms and always free. That includes the Locked On Titans YouTube channel. If you're watching there right now, make sure you subscribe, smash that notification bell so you know when all the content goes live, and throw a thumbs up on the video. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I really do appreciate that support. You can follow me on Twitter at TicTacTitans. Follow the show Facebook page at Locked On Titans Pod. But with that being said, time to dive back into this regular season schedule and the must-win games that I identified. I try to find 5 games for every category that we're going to discuss here, starting with the must-win games. And for me, the number one must-win game of the year is the home game in Week 7 against the Indianapolis Colts. Guys, as you have seen throughout the last few years, the Titans and the Colts are always going to be close. They're going to be duking it out for the division. I think that's more obvious this year than it's been the last 2 seasons, if I'm being honest with you. So with the fact that it's my belief that the Titans and Colts will again be close at the end of the season for the division title, and how critical it is to win the division, get that home playoff game, that's a must win. You can split with the Colts. You can lose in Indy and win in Tennessee and still have the opportunity to win the division and still not put yourself in too bad of a spot. But if you lose your game at home, that's going to make it tough on you. That's going to make it tough on the Titans to win the division if they can't beat Indy at home. And you look at Week 7 going into a very difficult stretch of games that includes Kansas City and Green Bay and Denver and Cincinnati. The Titans really need to get that win in Week 7 against the Colts. So that's the number one must win. For me, the next one, it's 2 division games. You got the home game in Week 14 against Jacksonville. You got the home game against Houston in Week 16. There's no way around this. The Titans have that really difficult mid-schedule or mid-period of the schedule. The last 5 games of the year, they're going to have to make a run. They get 3 games against the combination of Houston and Jacksonville, so that's going to be advantageous to them. They also get some easier games, although they do have to travel across the country to play the Chargers. There are some games that are winnable for the Titans at the end of the year, and most of that is that home division slate. So beating Houston and beating Jacksonville in the last 5 weeks of the season at home and taking care of that business, the Titans need to win their home division games. If the Titans want to win this division and get another home playoff game or make the playoffs in general out of the AFC South, the Titans need to sweep their home division games. Indy being the most important, obviously, but the Titans have to take care of that business otherwise in the division. They've had some slip-up games here and there, of course, but taking care of things at home is going to be so critical for the Titans in this year. And then finally, the last two games both come against the NFC East. And for me, the next must-win game is week 5 on the road against the Washington football team. Yes, the Washington, I know, the Washington Commanders. What a terrible name. This is my protest of that terrible football name. The Washington football team, I don't expect to be one of the better teams on the Titans schedule this year. I simply don't. And with that in mind, it's a game that they just have to win. The NFC East is kind of like the AFC South in a way. There's usually two bad teams, maybe a floater. There's usually two good teams, but not great teams in there. Philly and Dallas are kind of like the Titans and Colts. And then the Giants and Washington are kind of like the Texans and the Jags, maybe not to the same degree, of course, but just here recently in the recent stretches. So the Titans have to be able to win those games against the bottom teams in the NFC East. So Washington on the road is a game that the Titans must win. And then finally, like I was saying, the home game against the Giants in week 1. The Titans have to start out their season on the right note. They play 3 weeks in a row. They'll play Buffalo on the road on Monday Night Football, the Raiders, and then the Colts on the road. That's 3 really tough games in a row. They have to win that game against the Giants to start the year. They just have to. Not only is it going to be one of the lesser opponents that they play, they get the opportunity to play them with 2 brand new coordinators in week 1 before the guys are comfortable in the system. And they're at home. They must win that game against the Giants. So week 7 at home against Indy, week 14 at home against Jacksonville, week 16 at home against Houston, week 5 on the road against Washington, and week 1 at home against the Giants. Those are the must-win games for the Titans this year. Before we move into the X factor games that I think will determine whether the Titans hit their ceiling or hit their floor, do want to tell you guys about the best tasting protein bars in the galaxy from our friends at Built Bar. You get the best of both worlds when you try Built Bar. Yes, you're going to get all the health benefits that you need from a protein bar. They're low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. And if you want to compare those metrics against other popular protein bars, it is not even close. I mean, Built Bar is lower in the right categories, higher in the right categories, but Built Bar is number 1 in the most important category, and that is taste. All the bars are covered in 100% chocolate. The birthday cake puff bars that are out right now, guys, I implore you, go to built.com, use the code LOCKED15, get 15% off these delicious birthday cake puff bars. Oh, my Lanta. I had somebody in the comments yesterday say, all right, finally, you beat me down. I'm going to get the Built Bars. You will thank me later. I got delivered promotionally, because when you get famous, you get free stuff. Obviously a joke. I'm an F- celebrity list, but I got a free box of Built Bars, and that makes me feel famous, especially when they're the birthday cake puff bars. So good. So good. Especially you get the urge to eat candy and eat ice cream, especially in the summertime, getting you a really actually tasty, healthy protein bar from Built Bar. Oh, so good. Go to built.com, promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off at built.com. Titans fans, we are going to continue this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. A couple things that I want to talk to you guys about before we go into the X Factor games on the Titans schedule. If they win these games, they'll hit their ceiling. If they lose, they'll hit their floor. Before we go in tomorrow, I'm going to have more schedule reaction for you guys. I'm going to be talking about the toughest games on the schedule, the easiest games on the schedule, the toughest stretch of games, and how the Titans navigate that. So more schedule reaction coming tomorrow. On Thursday, I am going to have the Malik Willis deep dive. I have an interview with Malik Willis's personal quarterback trainer. I have an interview with the guy who covered Malik Willis in his first 2 years of college. I'm going to talk about what I see from him in 2022 and then how that progresses into 2023. I mean, some excellent content coming for you guys later this week here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you tune in. Make sure you tell your friends. Also, Thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans your podcast, your first listen every day. Make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you do stream, free and available everywhere. Your team every day. Boom, boom, boom. Take a drink of water, guys. Right now. Yes, you. Yes, you. I'm talking to you. Drink the water. I'm taking a drink. Hydration is so key, everyone. Hydration is so key. But let's get into the X Factor games on the Titans schedule this year. We just did the must wins. Week 7, home against Indy. Week 14, home against Jacksonville. Week 16, home against Houston. Week 5 on the road against Washington. Week 1 at home against the Giants. Now, the X Factor games, number 1 for me. Remember, this is the difference between the floor for the Titans, which I think is about 7-10. If worst case scenario, the Titans are going to go 7-10 if bad things happen. Best case scenario, I think the Titans go about 12-5 again. So, these are the games that'll make the difference. That'll make the swing here. The 5-win swing. Week 3 against the Raiders at home. So, if the Titans lose to the Raiders, who were a playoff team last year, the Raiders who added Devontae Adams, added Chandler Jones, a much improved Raiders team. If the Titans were to lose to the Raiders early in the season, I don't think it would be time for panic. I don't think it would be a referendum on the Titans at that point in time. The Raiders are going to be a pretty good team. They were a good team last year. They've added 2 superstar level players, one who dismantled the Titans this year and one who dismantled the Titans the year before that. So, I don't think that would be a terrible loss. It wouldn't hurt kill the season. But if the Titans were able to win that game, that's a nice step. I think the Titans will lose that game to Buffalo. The Titans have had Buffalo's number for a while. That has to swing back the other way. Monday Night Football on the road. Okay. The Titans should beat the Giants in week 1, in my opinion. Going to 2-1 there with the tough stretch in the middle of the season and a game against the Colts right around the corner from that Raiders game the next week. I think getting that win against the Raiders to go to 2-1 early in the year, or even 3-0 if the Titans do beat Buffalo. If you're someone in the comments right now or listening says, oh, the Titans are going to beat Buffalo. Okay, great. Going to 3-0 heading into that first matchup against Indy. That, again, X Factor game. That would change the potential of the team. Number 2, week 10 at home against the Broncos. Again, the Broncos look to be a much improved team. They have a superstar quarterback now. They have a good infrastructure. Yes, they play in a tough division, which may make it difficult for them to ultimately reach their highest highs. But in a one-game scenario against the Titans, that's going to be a difficult matchup. Especially because it's in that tough stretch for the Titans. So, if the Titans were able to win that game against Denver, sandwich in between Kansas City and Green Bay, that would be huge. Because there's a good chance they lose a game against Kansas City, good chance they lose a game against Green Bay. There's an okay chance they lose a game against Cincinnati. They're going to lose games, guys. You can't just say they're not going to lose any games. They're going to lose some games. They're not going undefeated, okay? So Kansas City and Green Bay are likely games that they could lose. If they could get that win at home against Denver in between to kind of stem the tide, to kind of, steady the boat, that would be a huge win towards their ceiling, I think. Number 3, week 15 on the road at the Chargers. Going across the country. And the Titans have that week 14 game home against Jacksonville, week 16 home against Houston. If they were to in between that, the Oreo filling, if the filling could be a win on the road across the country against the Chargers, yeah, that would mean great things for the Titans to rip off a 3-game streak there in that critical final 5-game stretch. I mean, that would just be great for them. That would be great for them. And then you got a game at home on Thursday Night Football against the Cowboys. And then you get 10 days rest before you finish the season on the road against Jacksonville. That is a great chance for a 5-game win streak to end the year, which, again, would lean the Titans towards their ceiling, which is why these are the X Factor games. Next, week 4 at Indianapolis. I talked about it. The Titans must win their game at home against Indy in week 7. But it wouldn't be insane for the Titans to lose on the road in week 4 against Indy. That wouldn't be insane. Nobody would crush them if that were the case and say the season's over. That's not the case. But if the Titans were to win that and win the game, if you could sweep the Colts like we saw last year, puts the Titans, boom, much closer towards their ceiling. So that's a big X factor game if they can win that road game against Indianapolis. And then finally, Week 17, Thursday night football against the Cowboys. Again, same thing like I talked about with the Chargers. I think the Titans have 3 wins in the final 5 games with their 3 division games, 2 against Jacksonville, 1 against Houston. If they can win the game on the road across the country against the Chargers and then win that game against the Cowboys on Thursday night football in primetime before they get that 10-day rest before the last game of the season, the Titans, because I expect the Titans to lose some games in the middle of the year in that Cincy, Kansas City, Green Bay, Denver, Philly, Colts stretch, in that 7-13 stretch. I expect the Titans to lose some games, okay? So if they can cap off the year, ripping off 5 straight wins, get some early season wins against some of these tough teams, that'll just be so huge to help them stem the tide during that tough stretch. It's so funny, too, because they had that tough stretch in the middle of last year, and they won every game, and then they lost some games in the end, in the beginning, that they shouldn't have lost. Just how it works. But we're going to talk about the games that, excuse me, I'm most excited for. Just personal preference here. The games I am most excited to watch next year. Before we get into that, though, do want to tell you guys about rockauto.com. Rockauto.com is an online company that's been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their online catalog, really easy to use, really easy to navigate. You can quickly see all the different parts that they have available, all the different brands, all the different specifications. They have everything from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil, even brand new carpet. So make sure that you go to rockauto.com today to see all the parts available for your car or truck. And make sure that when you place your order, you put Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that I sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Titans fans, we are going to cap off this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast with the games that I am just flat out most excited to watch this year from the Titans 2022 regular season schedule. We went over my must wins. We went over my X Factor games. Now I'm going to dive into those games that I'm most excited about. Before we do, I want to thank you guys again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. As for your second listen, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL podcast. It's free and available on all platforms. Monday through Friday, you got different Locked On hosts bringing you the national news in the NFL, the biggest storylines, the biggest talking points. You get all your Titans news in under 30 minutes here with me on the Locked On Titans podcast. Now pair that with getting all your national news in under 30 minutes with the Locked On NFL podcast. I am actually the host of the Thursday show. So I would appreciate your support if you went to the Locked On NFL YouTube channel, subscribed over there, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you stream. Again, great way to get your Titans news and then your national NFL news together in the morning with the Locked On NFL podcast. But moving forward here, my most excited games. Number 1, that game against Denver at home in Week 10. Playing against Russell Wilson. Again, Denver's new and improved. They're going to be a shiny toy. Everybody's going to be pumping them up. Bring them into Nashville. It's going to be excellent. And again, it's a big X Factor game. It's a big game for the Titans to determine how good or bad their season is going to be. So I'm just excited to see this new look, shiny. Everyone's excited. Broncos team come into Nashville against the beat 'em up, rock 'em, sock 'em. Nobody believes in us Titans. It's just going to be a great game, great storylines, great atmosphere. Very excited about that. Number 2, I'm excited for that rematch against Cincinnati. I am. Week 12, a lot of bad blood between the two teams because of all the chirping, just the way the game went. I mean, I can't help it. I'm excited for the rematch. I'm excited for those fan bases to spar again. I mean, that was quite the atmosphere last year, and although it ended terribly for the Titans, still a game that I'm very excited about and anticipating quite a bit. Number 3, and I know you guys can argue it, do whatever you want. The revenge game. Titans going to Philly, playing against A.J. Brown. That's going to be a fun game. Philly fans are relentless. And Titans fans feel a little, I don't know how to say it, like they were done wrong a little bit with the way that AJ handled the exit, requesting the trade, maybe it looking like a little backdoor dealings with Philly and the agent, turning on a dime, the way the Titans talked about him and then the way it went down, just feels a little dirty. No way around it. And no matter what, Philly fans are going to have something to say about the Titans and losing AJ. This is going to be a big game. This is going to be a big game. A lot of storylines there. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. Going towards the end of the season, that game against the Cowboys on Thursday Night Football, just everybody always slurping the Cowboys all the time. I loved it in 2018 where the Titans went in there and laid the smackdown on them. I mean, that was fun. To hear all the national media people have to react to that when the darling media Cowboys get knocked around by the lowly Tennessee Titans. I love that. I love that. So I think that's going to be great. And the Cowboys are my mom's team. So anytime there's that inter-family rivalry stuff, the Packers are actually my dad's team, but I'm not quite looking forward to that game as much. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the toughest games on the Titans schedule to start tomorrow's show. But looking forward to that Cowboys game, primetime game. It should be fun. And that Week 15 game against the Chargers, I like Justin Herbert. I'm excited to see how the Titans play against Justin Herbert. We get that rematch from 2019, the goal line stand. I mean, that was awesome. So I'd love to see some of that as well reenacted. That would be great. So just some teams that we don't get to see all the time, some big matchups with some spicy narratives. I'm excited to see those games. But that's some more schedule analysis, guys. We're going to dive back into the schedule again tomorrow as well. So I'm excited to go over the toughest games, the easiest games, and the toughest stretch of the year for the Titans. We'll get into all of that tomorrow. But that's going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.